Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. On Valentine's Day, the 14th of February 2020, Race Sim Studio once again rewrote the book on sim racing mods. This, Formula Hybrid 2021. Yes, officially this is called Formula Hybrid X 2021. Why the X? Well, the X stands for experimental. What is the experiment about this? Well, look to the name, 2021. In the first ever Race Sim Studio mod that I ever featured on the channel, and the first one that I ever reviewed, Formula Hybrid 2017, I compared that car to the Book of Genesis, in that 2017 car was the first ever realistic and very highly polished look at a 2017 Formula 1 type car in sim racing, of course also the first in Assetto Corsa. With Formula Hybrid X 2021, I look not to Genesis, but to Revelation. Signs of that which shall be in short times to come. Here it is. The future is today. Of course, Race Sim Studio, we have known them for years now at this point, and they have garnered a reputation for making some of the absolute best cars in Assetto Corsa, and some of the absolute best cars in all of sim racing thereby. Formula Hybrid has been a series that has been ongoing since 2017, and of course the 2017 car was an absolute triumph. For the first time anywhere, anybody had attempted to make a 2017 type Formula 1 type car made to the actual FIA technical regulations for the Formula 1 World Championship, and they managed to put that car together before any of the real-world Formula 1 teams had ever had their cars run on track. In the research that I've done in the years since I did that initial review of that car, I found that Race Sim Studio actually had that car 100% complete and ready to go before Christmas 2016. Which means that not even they had gotten any sort of advanced knowledge with regard to the 2017 Formula 1 designs, and their work at that point represented the most sophisticated and most complete look at a 2017 Formula 1 car that anybody outside the actual Formula 1 industry ever had. The same is true for this car before us here. 2021, much like 2017, will also herald a new era for Formula 1. We're going to have a shift, once again, in aerodynamic philosophy in Grand Prix race car design. Gone will be a heavy reliance on top-side aerodynamic benefits in terms of large front and rear wings and lots of highly sculpted bodywork topside trying to gain more downforce via more efficient and more effective airflow management. And all of those efforts are going to concentrate on the underside of the car. We're going to have ground effect once again in Grand Prix racing, making a return for the first time since the early 1980s, wherein teams such as Lotus pioneered ground effect in Grand Prix racing by means of wings underneath the car, actually shaping the car's under tray as an airfoil, as a wing in its own right, and then sealing that under tray with very crude by modern standards sliding skirts that physically ran along the surface of the racetrack to seal off the under tray and increase the overall aerodynamic efficiency. Ground effect was banned in Formula 1 by 1982 because the FIA, or really FISA as it was known at the time, they saw cornering speeds getting far too high for the circuits to manage accidents. If cars went out of control and went off track at the sorts of speeds that they were starting to achieve even in the early 80s, they really feared for the safety of not only drivers but of spectators and marshals and other personnel. So ground effect was banned in Formula 1, and it has not since returned, at least not to the full extent that it once had. However, for 2021, it returns, and it returns with a vengeance. In June or July of 2019, the FIA actually released pictures of a prototype scale model, wind tunnel model of a 2021 car, built around the proposed 2021 Formula 1 regulations. Now, of course, that car is just a prototype. I do not believe that there are any plans for that car to be built up in full scale and actually be a running car. However, the writing is on the wall, not only to Formula 1 teams, but to all of us as fans as well. This is what we could expect. Race Sim Studio, not one to shy away from a challenge. Apparently, they took a look at that 2021 spec car and they said, alright, I think we could do one better, and I think we can actually bring this into Assetto Corsa. And that is the backstory to Formula Hybrid X 2021. There it is before you. It's here. The future is today, ladies and gentlemen. What of this car? What actually is it? What's going on under the skin? Well, in 2021, yes, we're going to see a raft of aerodynamic changes that will tremendously impact the appearance and functionality of the cars on a macrocosmic scale, rather. However, underneath the skin, how much is really changing here? Well, not all that much, all things considered. Yes, there has been much talk about the 21-inch rims, the 21-inch wheels, going on to Formula One cars for 2021, and yes, that is something that we are going to see, and it is something that features on this car before us. However, beyond that, really, not all that much is going to change mechanically. The engines are still going to be the single-turbo V6 hybrid power units. Again, an internal combustion engine, 1.6-liter V6 at 90 degrees bank angle with a single turbocharger out the back. That is going to be mated to a hybrid system, an MGU-K, a motor generator unit kinetic, and an MGU-H, a motor generator unit heat, run off of the turbocharger shaft. All of that is what we see right now in 2020. And apparently we're going to continue to see that through the balance of the decade as far as we know at this time. Therefore, on this car, what do we have? Well, we do have the same V6 internal combustion engine, turbocharged to the tune of 1 turbocharger. By itself, the engine in this car, according to Content Manager, is producing about 810 horsepower, and it's generating around 560 newton-meters of torque. Combining that with the hybrid powertrain, though, the hybrid powertrain, remember, homologated to have a maximum output of 160 horsepower, that combines to give us a total Content Manager rated output of 990 horsepower in full-on hot lap qualifying mode for that hybrid power unit. This combines with a chassis weight of 768 kilograms, including the driver, mind you, for a power-to-weight ratio of 0.78 kilograms per horsepower. So, yes, we obviously have more than 1 horsepower per kilogram here. Very, very impressive stats there. In terms of what RaceSim Studio have done on the model of this car, well, according to Content Manager, the model 235 total objects, and that's comprised of 351,847 triangles. Now, no, this is not the most detailed model that RaceSim Studio have ever done. The honor to that one actually goes to their GTM Biro 6, which is totally not the BMW M6 GTE car. However, RaceSim Studio, they have garnered a reputation for not only making awesome physics and awesome subject matter, but for very highly polished models as well. Even though this one is not the most detailed one they've ever made, it certainly looks the part. Have a look at all of this. You get in close, and you really don't see any pixelation anywhere. Everything looks crisp and clean. You don't see any weird ghosting through the meshes. In the front wing end fences here, you see that wonderful carbon texturing underneath the very thin layer of paint there. I've never seen an effect like that before on a sim racing car. Looks absolutely spectacular. What else is going on here? You see the wheels here, they look a little strange. Well, we have, for the first time ever that I know of in Assetto Corsa, we have display units on the wheels. And if we stop the rotation here, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at this. Go into free cam mode, and you can just see what I'm talking about here. You can see these strips of LEDs, these light-emitting diodes here. These are just showing green bars by our perspective right now, but when the wheel is actually spinning, they spin fast enough to create a physical refresh rate, which means if you manipulate the illumination of these LEDs, you can actually start to draw images with it, taking into account the wheel speed as the refresh rate on the display, which means that when you're out on track, you'll actually see the wheel displays displaying information, such as RaceSim Studio, except no imitations, as well as the car's position out on track when you are running with multiple cars in the same session. That is something absolutely groundbreaking, and again, very, very cool to see that feature coming into Assetto Corsa. Again, RaceSim Studio, not only do they make great mods, but they are extremely innovative. They are a small team, but a very competent one, and they're always trying to find new ways to find new boundaries of just what's possible to do with this absolute stalwart of a racing sim, Assetto Corsa. Now, breaking down some of the formalities now, let's take a look at what is going on with this car? It looks so tremendously different from what we're used to seeing in Formula One cars of 2019 and 2020 vintage. Of course, it does look very much like that prototype that the FIA had made in the summer of 2019 for wind tunnel testing. But what's going on here? First of all, on the front end, you see that we have a very wide and low nose and a very wide and low front wing, but it has this negative curve to it. It's curving down toward the deck relative to the nose, and that, of course, is very intentional. You'll also notice that we saw the 2019 and now 2020 wings, how they were cleaned up in terms of their complexity and made a little bit wider. Well, this one is cleaned up even more. We don't see nearly as many flap elements individually set into the wing there, even as we saw in 2019 and now we're seeing in 2020. We just have 3 elements here, one of which is the main plane, and therefore 2 auxiliary flap elements there, creating the vast majority of the front wing's aerodynamic downforce. You can see very small slot gaps there, as we would expect on a Formula One spec front wing, but really no cascades, no multiple flap elements. Really, looking at cars like the Ferrari and the Mercedes and the Red Bull of 2020, we're seeing 5, 6, 7, 8 flap elements at different places in these front wings. This, nope, just 2 of them. And then, of course, you have a relatively neutral, pitched main plane there coming off from either side. The front wing is in 2 principal elements mounted directly to the nose. No pylons, no nothing. What also do we not see anymore? We don't see vortex generators at the bottom of this wing along the end fences, nor do we see the end fences coming below the level of the main plane. We now have these triangular end fences that exclusively extend upward and rearward. We don't have any of those inverted U channels any longer on these front wing end fences. Remains to be seen whether or not we're going to see something like this for 2021 in the real world, but that's what Race Sim Studio have done in their interpretation of the 2021 technical regulations, and that is what they've come up with. We do still have the dive planes here on the front wing end fences, but nope, that's about it. You don't see any outwash happening. You really don't see any complexity just beyond the principal structure of the wing itself. Very nice. The nose profile on this car as well, very flat, very long, very wide, very cool. Not much to write home about there. We do have these little intakes here, which would just be for cockpit cooling, I would reckon. And we do, if we go back into FreeCam here, we do have a little outlet up top here for what must be an S-duct underneath. You can see the pitot tubes here just for getting some of your air data there. And you can see this slot gap inside the nose there, which is going to be firing air out across the top of the chassis at untold velocity. Of course, that's going to be intaking probably someplace underneath the nose. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to be able to find an inlet for that. However, knowing Race Sim Studio and having followed them for quite a few years now, I know that it has to be there somewhere. I just can't find it. I'm just not convinced that it's these 2 little nostrils on the front of the nose tip. Nope, not big enough. In any regard, what else do we have on this car? Here's our front suspension. This looks conventional, if nothing else on the car does. Double wishbone, push rod, front suspension. You can see here the push rod is not quite as at an acute an angle as we're used to seeing now in 2020, but it is still there, still very much a double wishbone push rod arrangement. Moving across to the side of the car, through the flanks here, behind the front axle, you can see that we have another novelty in the 2021 rules. We have got these little winglets over top of the wheels. These are actually mounted to the wheel itself, into the wheel hub structure. So these wings do not rotate, obviously, with the wheels because they just get run over by the car. But they do turn with the steering, and they are sprung on the suspension. So they do move with the wheel left and right with steering input, and they also do move vertically with the suspension movement. This is also going to be something that we see in 2021 simply to try and cut down on the turbulence generated by the tire wake, because of course an open-wheeled race car does create a lot of turbulence as the tires are going through the air. Not only are they going through the air and they're very chunky bits of kit, but they're also rotating, which means that they're imparting forces all of their own onto the surrounding air, which means turbulence is going to happen. If you've ever watched a car antenna flap around as you're driving around at reasonable speed, that's kind of what's going on with the tires as well. It just sucks all of the air in one direction and then it sucks it all back the other way, and you get this sort of oscillation that sets in, and it just doesn't work very well. That creates a lot of turbulence currently for Formula One cars, and it's something that they're trying to fix for 2021. Returning to the flanks of the car, what's going on in this area? Barge boards? No, no more barge boards. They're completely absent here. The under section of that front end, the keel section, nothing. This section just in front of the side pod here, nothing. So where are the barge boards? They're gone. What have they been replaced with? This. No, these are not barge boards. What are these? These, ladies and gentlemen, these are the suck intakes. Yes, these are the tunnels that are going to go through the car, and as we can see here, they go quite a ways under the side pod before they spill out in this direction here. And then, of course, there are two more that we can follow and see where they go. Yes, all the way through the under tray this one goes. How about that? Yes, these are the Venturi tunnels. These are the things that are going to be sucking up all of the air that's rammed through the front section of the car and then accelerating it through the under tray before shooting it out at untold velocity at the rear. That, ladies and gentlemen, is ground effect, and that is how these cars are going to be generating the vast majority of their high-speed grip. Yes, this also means that we no longer need any turning vanes, flow modifiers, or anything topside because it doesn't really matter as much. If anything, you're going to want to keep that quiet so that you can cut down on as much drag as possible, and that is exactly what RSS are doing here. The rear zone of the car, it looks reasonably conventional as far as we're concerned for 2019 and 2020 designs, but big differences. First of all, that diffuser that we mentioned, two gigantic tunnels out the back, no multiple levels to this diffuser, it's just one big fat channel tunnel through the middle there. Yes, it almost looks like you could drive a train through there. Well, you are. You're driving trains of air through there at very high speed, and of course, when a flow accelerates over an adjacent surface, the relative pressure drops, which means you create a partial vacuum underneath that adjacent surface in this case, which means suck effect and lots of it. Lotus 79, meet 21st century, indeed. The other big difference on the rear end of this car, the rear wing. Have a look here. It is a bit wider and a little bit higher than it is currently in 2020. And also the biggest difference is end fences, the end plates there on the rear wing, completely absent. They're no longer here. What's this going to mean in terms of aero efficiency? It's probably going to hurt the cars a little bit if I had to be a betting man. And looking at what I've been able to see here in my own testing with this car, and yes, you can see it is DRS capable, and you do have DRS functionality out on track. But in my own testing with this car, straight line speeds are a little bit diminished relative to its 2019 counterpart because, well, I think this rear wing, just being so big and mounted so high, is acting a little bit like a parachute. Now, of course, you can trim it out. It's infinitely adjustable in terms of what you can do with your aerodynamic settings in the pit lane, but you do feel it, and the straight line speed is down a little bit. But if it makes the racing better, I think it's a worthy compromise. Other details that we can see on this car, rear suspension, what do we have? Double wishbone and pull rod. Yes. Again, that is also something that is utterly conventional for Formula One cars in 2019 and 2020. Pull rod rear suspension, push rod front suspension, absolutely without fail. All of the teams have been doing that so far. The other thing, because the engines are the same, there is our central exhaust outlet out of the exhaust side of the turbocharger. No wastegate exhaust here on this particular car, but they are still going to be legal for 2021. Across the top side and front section and midsection of the monocoque here, this doesn't look all that much different. Yes, the side pods are very tight, a little bit more bulbous perhaps than what we're used to seeing from 2019 and 2020, but they are there, and they're side pods. We have the centrally mounted air intake snorkel as well up top. This looks very similar to what RSS did on Formula Hybrid 2019 as well, and is replete with its T-cam camera mount there, with the camera lens modeled, very nice, and then of course the two over-the-shoulder cameras if you're into that sort of thing. Nobody is. FIA, FOM, please stop using the over-the-shoulder camera. Halo, of course, this is something that's been on Formula One cars and now many other open-wheel race cars since about 2018. 2018 for Formula One, 2018 and change for some other series. IndyCar now is even using a variant of the Halo structure in their aero screen concept, but here it is. It is going to remain on the cars for 2021, and most likely it's going to look quite a bit like this. Also in this car, we have the ability to go into the cockpit from showroom view. Therefore, we're going to do that presently. We'll fly in here. We'll take our time, perhaps, but we will fly in here, eventually. Yes, we're going to take the whole tour to FHX 2019. Easy for me to say. Come on, go in, yes, and we've landed, yes. Now, we're way high in terms of the position that ultimately we'll be driving from. We can remedy that a little bit with FreeCam. The field of view now is all messed up, of course. However, you can get an idea of what it will look like from the cockpit. Yes, the field of view is not at all accurate in terms of what we're actually going to see out on track. But there it is. There's the steering wheel. You'll see Precision Sim Engineering on the steering wheel, and you will notice that the steering wheel is identical to the one that we had in Formula Hybrid 2019. Precision Sim Engineering, they are, in addition to RSS being a real-world company, PSE, they are also a real-world company, and they are a manufacturer of very high-end sim racing equipment. So they make steering wheels, including the one that you see before you. You can actually buy a physical version of this for your sim racing rig with all the buttons, and with the display, with the shift lights, and all of that. It's very expensive, but it does look very cool. In addition to all sorts of apparel, motion rig gear, pedal mounts, chassis mounts if you want that sort of thing. They make it. It's available for you. Very cool. In addition to all of that, you have got more cockpit details. These are a little bit more pedestrian, if you can use that word with a RaceSim Studio mod. We've got all of these little buttons and switches and dials in this section that you'll never see when you're out on track. But, of course, RaceSim Studio, being the absolutely fastidious people that they are, they just couldn't let this section of the car go to waste either. So we have got all of this detail through here. Of course, the carbon fiber composite monocoque through here. You can see all of that great texture work. The seat, of course, more great texture work. The seat belts, the buckles, all of that. It looks absolutely fantastic. There, of course, is their logo. Very nice. The other side of the cockpit, this is the left side of the car. The chassis plate. There it is, Formula RSS 21X. There it is. There's the RaceSim Studio website. Go there right now and buy this car. If you don't have it already, please and thank you. Down through here, the front section of the car. No pedals here, but yeah, you're never going to notice that, and it doesn't really matter anyway. Just look at that. We're inside the front of the chassis. You'll never be here, but it looks absolutely gorgeous nonetheless. Back up through here, through the top of the cockpit, and returning kind of to driver eye level, but very, very cool. No detail goes unnoticed or untouched by these guys. Through here, the back of the steering wheel. Can we see the back of the steering wheel? There it is. There are the upshift and downshift paddles, the clutch paddles. It looks absolutely fantastic. Yet another detail that you'll never see. There's the quick release collar there. You'll never see this, but they've modeled it anyway, and it looks absolutely resplendent. Haven't said that a while in one of these reviews. Really, it's another absolute triumph on the part of RaceSim Studio. They always do an absolutely fantastic job on every car that they make, whether it's one that's modeled on a real-world car or one that is completely fantasy, as this one is, at least for the moment. But, once again, it is very much based on very real regulations, the ones that we are going to see beginning in 2021 in the Formula One World Championship. Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future indeed. Of course, we do have to drive this car in short order, and we're going to be doing that. Stand by next. Welcome to Catalunya. Before we get out on track, of course, I'll look through the setup screen to show you what's going on with the menagerie of setup options and parameters that we can adjust here. But before all of that, let's just take a look at this model now in natural light out here in the sun. And just as it did in showroom view, it looks absolutely perfect. No, it is not the most detailed model in terms of number of polygons that RSS have ever put out, but it is very, very good indeed, and it certainly looks the part. Really, no pixelation to speak of when we get up close to the different shapes and the multiple different elements that comprise this wonderful 3D experience here. And, of course, the livery looking absolutely great here as well. Mostly with a matte finish. There are some higher gloss areas, particularly in the rear section of the engine cover, so that all looks very, very nice. Of course, the livery here with that digital camouflage look as well, because, well, this is meant to be a test car, and it's even got a little X there on the very small vestigial shark fin to denote that this is experimental. Those carbon fiber textures on the wing end fences that we talked about in showroom view, do we really see them here? Not as much, at least not on that side. What about the side of the car that's in shadow? There we go. So you can see that a little bit more clearly there through the reflection. You can see just how that changes as I move around our eye point a little bit. So that carbon look through the paint, still apparent, looks absolutely cool. Very, very nice. Anyway, to the setup screen, see what's going on with this thing. Well, we're on default setup here, and what do we have? Well, first off, the gear display. You can see here we have an 8-speed box here, fixed ratios, just as in the real world. This has been something in the regulations since the 2014 season, believe it or not. That year's a little bit of a bogey year in that they did have, I believe, 2 free ratio changes at some point because it just was the first year that they were doing it, and the teams were probably going to mess it up, but now they are fixed forevermore. The teams declare their gear ratios at the start of the season, and they keep them unless there is some big technical reason why they must change them, and of course they would incur a penalty for doing so. But we can see here theoretical Vmax of 356 kilometers per hour. That, of course, is also assuming that we have no friction and that we are in a vacuum. The next parameter here, the tire screen. We've got 3 tire compounds to choose from, soft, medium, and hard. You can see here we're currently on the mediums by default. If we select the hard compound, you can see that the tire sidewalls, the lettering there, it changes color. So hard is white, medium is yellow, and then the soft is red. The mediums are the default. Default tire pressures here, 14 psi all around. The range of adjustment varies between 10 at the low end and 24 at the top end, so you'd have a little bit of range of adjustment in there. Fuel zeroed out here to keep the engine quiet. Maximum fuel capacity in this car is 140 liters. We'll just zero that out to keep things quiet again. The electronic screen, this is where we make all of our setup parameters for the hybrid components, and of course these we can mostly all adjust out on track. In fact, we can adjust all of these parameters out on track as well. Default MGUK delivery, that is the deploy setting for the motor generator unit kinetic that's driving the rear axle directly. Balanced low there, but we can range from charging, which is no deploy and all harvest, balanced low, balanced high, overtake, top speed, and hot lap there, which is full beans all the time. MGUK recovery, this is effectively a negative net torque that is on the rear axle to harvest some of that energy that would normally be lost under braking. Defaults to 50%, and this is just a direct 1-to-1 between 0 and 100, so 50% there is our recovery rate by default. MGUH mode, that's the motor generator unit heat, run off of the turbocharger. Just like pretty much every other hybrid car in Assetto Corsa, we can toggle this between battery and motor. In other words, this just means that in the battery mode, this is going to be harvesting energy down the straights to put it back into the main battery pack. Motor mode obviously takes that energy and puts it into the MGUK motor to drive the rear axle, get a little bit more speed. The brake engine here, the engine braking, this is conventional. It just determines how much grab you've got there on the overrun. 7 out of 11 is the default. Aerodynamics, this is interesting here. We have front and rear wings, and that's all we can adjust here. The default value is 30 in the front and 10 in the rear. Range of adjustment goes from 0 to 36 in the front and from 0 to 12 at the rear. So default values again shown. Brakes, brake bias and brake power, 53% to the front is our default value. We have a range of adjustment from 46% to the front all the way to 64% to the front. Interesting there. And of course, this is something that you're going to be changing out on track as the balance changes with fuel load, tire wear, and of course, no matter what you're doing, you're always going to have to be compromised a little bit with your brake bias with these kinds of cars because they harvest off of the rear axle. So more often than not, you want a little bit more front bias because you do have that net negative torque on the rear axle when you're regenning. Drivetrain, differential adjustments here in power, coast, and preload. Default values shown. We can adjust this to a very high degree. We can have it locked up to 95% in power as well as in coast. Our preload ranges from 0 all the way up to 200 Newton meters. So again, a very wide range of differential adjustments that you have. And of course, that's also going to be influenced by driving style. So in other words, personal preference as well as balance. Again, depending on your tires, depending on the track state, things like that, you may or may not want the car to be more free at the rear so you get more agility with your turn-in. This first suspension screen, first of 5 suspension screens, we've got our alignment, camber toe, and all 4 corners there. Default values shown.
main suspension screen, anti-roll bars front and rear, plus your wheel rates and ride heights and travel ranges for your push rods there on all four corners. Dampers, fast and slow, bound and rebound on all four corners there. You can adjust all of them individually if you want. Heave rates, these are the third springs, front and rear, and this controls heave, which is the relative motion of the chassis to the ground vertically. And again, because this car has a bit thinner of a tire in terms of the tire sidewall, the wheels are 21 inches in diameter, which means that even though the overall circumference of the wheel and tire assembly is the same as it is now, the current cars run a 13-inch wheel, so there's a lot more rubber between the wheel and the tread surface of the tire. Here, that is greatly diminished. Therefore, the suspension, particularly in heave, is going to be doing a bit more work, so your heave dampers become a little bit more important on a car like this. The bump stops, these are basically the ultimate limits in your suspension travel, so when you go up against the bump stop, that's going to be bottoming the suspension. Various here, steering assist, this is your power steering. This will determine how heavy or how light your steering is. Visuals, the one visual adjustment we can make here on the setup screen is the halo. The center stay on halo, just like we could do with the 2019 car. You can see here if we select option 1, you can make that center stay semi-transparent, so you can hide that if that works a little bit better for you. I personally just prefer to run it as is. And then, of course, the last screen here, pit stop strategy. This is complete game default. Speaking of default, let's go back completely to the default setup and start getting this thing out on track. In the cockpit, now that the car is all alive, let's go through our instrumentation that's available. You'll notice that this steering wheel is identical to what we got on the 2019 car, and of course the steering wheel is meant to emulate a real-world product from Precision Sim Engineering that you can buy for your rig if you're so inclined. Very expensive. However, instrumentation in abundance here. First off, the lights that are flashing at us. They're flashing at us because we're in the pit lane and the pit lane speed limiter is active. From the left-hand side, you can see those two green lights, one of which is solidly on and the other one is flashing intermittently. Those are our DRS status lights. The leftmost one just lets us know when DRS is available. If DRS is available, it will illuminate. If DRS is activated, as in the flap is open, that second green light to the right, that one will light up, and then that means that the flap is open. If we close the flap, then it goes out again, and in this case, it returns to flashing because the pit lane speed limiter is active. Across the wheel there, we have got the red lights and the blue lights. Those are our shift lights, so our tachometer basically. You get up into the blue lights, they come up from left to right. Get up into the blues, upshift. On the LCD screen, and we can see in the steering wheel, you can see we have got a clock, so 9:55 ticking by. That is our current lap time. To the left of that, you can see that white number 70. That is the temperature of our MGU battery pack, I'm led to believe, 70 degrees C indicated. In the upper right, we're going to have a live lap time delta relative to our session best, so it's blank right now because we haven't turned a lap yet. Below that, we're going to have our last lap time. Below that, we're going to have our best lap time in purple. Below that, we can see our tachometer there, numerically represented now, idling at 3,700 revs on the crankshaft, and as the revs on the engines change, obviously you can see that that is going to be updating in real time. Below that, that number 1, that is our current lap, so we're on lap number 1 at the moment. The left-hand side of this display, you can see those two bars, a green bar and a blue one. That is indicative of the state of charge of the MGU battery pack. The green bar is the master state of charge that is available in the car, full stop. So we're at 100% right now, so that green bar is all the way up to the top, and you can see a green number 100 below that as well. That's going to tick up or down as we discharge and recharge the battery pack. Below that, we have got ourselves our lap, per lap allotment there. You can see the blue lettering up top says lap. That's our per lap allotment of MGU charge. We're limited to 33 seconds per lap on that. So you can, and quite often, you will run out of your per lap allotment of power before you will actually completely discharge the complete energy store as indicated by the green bar. Conversely, you can run out of your main energy store before you would theoretically use how much power you're allocated for on a lap. So you do have to manage the electrical power management a little bit. In the center, of course, gear position indicator, big white N right now. Go up through the box there. That's in 8th gear. Come down to neutral and reverse, quick as you like. Below that, we have got our speed readout at 0 right now. kilometers per hour, so we're stopped reading 0. To the right of that, in the center, we have got our fuel level in liters, so indicating 50 right now. And then lastly on there, we have got our position indicator showing P1, and we're the only car on track, so that will always show P1 for the purposes of this session. Other than that, really nothing else in the cockpit, no other instrumentation, no other lights or anything like that, but very nicely done all around by Racing Studio. One other thing that I would like to point out, though, is in the 2019 car, we had the ability to change pages on this steering wheel. We do not have that ability in this one. And honestly, the only other things that were on that second page of the steering wheel display were tire pressures, and there were other little things that would let you know if you were getting some wheel spin. So the little boxes that represented the tires would turn red if you were overstepping the limits of the tire, but to be honest, doesn't really have that much of a benefit, and they obviously deleted it here, and I have no qualms about that whatsoever. However, that's about it for the instrumentation in this car. Let's drive the thing. Pedals in the lower left as always, and all the other pertinent information, you'll well be able to read it from the steering wheel just as I will. Get going here. And there we are. Ensure that we are, in fact, in charge mode. Just get everything up to temperature here. Not using tire warmers, not because you can't, because of course you can, but just don't like them, to be honest with you. I've stopped using tire warmers. Makes the outlap a little bit more interesting. We'll get everything up to temperature now. Medium tires will take a little bit to get there, but once they are there, they'll stay there pretty nicely. And at the moment, you can just hear the wonderful engine sounds that Racing Studio have developed for this car. I'd like to think that that came out of my influence, but of course it did not, at least not exclusively by any means. A number of people in the RSS Discord had requested that they model their sounds after the 2019 Honda engines, as heard in the Red Bull and Toro Rosso cars, and, well, that's what they've done, and it sounds absolutely great, although, to me, personally, nothing will ever really compare to the very nice major third harmonics of the old Formula 1 V10s, but if it must be a V6 turbo hybrid, this is certainly not a bad one. It's our first lap complete, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Pretty sure we're going to be able to beat that time. Turn 4, the tires are pretty much there, still a little bit squirrely at times. But we are getting there. Turn 5. Tires feel like they're more or less in the sweet spot, which means we can now start to speak representatively in terms of how this thing is behaving. First thing that you will definitely notice getting into this car for the first time is it has a lot less high-speed grip than its 2019 predecessor. And that, of course, is completely by design. Remember, we are shifting our aerodynamic philosophy from top side downforce generation to bottom side, to the under tray, and therefore ground effect. That is exactly what we're doing here. So the front and rear wings, yes, they are very important in terms of getting the ultimate level of performance out of this car, but you'll find that the under tray is actually doing the vast majority of our overall downforce generation. What this means, though, is that your low speed and medium speed cornering grip is greatly diminished. And that's simply because your aerodynamic benefit there is greatly diminished, all things considered. Overall, in terms of the averages that I've been able to find so far in my testing, this car is about 4 seconds a lap off of its 2019 counterpart. And that, of course, is in qualifying trim on basically no fuel at all. In the race stints, longer stints anyway, with more fuel and without the softest tires on board, we're going to be talking about 9, maybe 8, 7 seconds even off of a qualifying lap in a 2019 car. However, what do we have here in terms of vehicle dynamics? Well, first of all, the most impressive thing about it is just how composed it is. Just like its 2019 and particularly 2017 4Runner, it's immensely stable. Its normal happy place is to be straight and level, and it is very much trying to get you back there all the time. It does not feel unduly oversteery. It does not really feel unstable at all. And again, that's something that you might have anticipated by looking at what their goal is with this car, to take away quite a bit of the downforce. You might expect the car to become unstable, but in actuality, no. It is very well sorted, even just on default setup here. At high speed, there is a little bit of a proclivity for understeer, but then again, in the medium and low speed stuff, it is very neutral, if not a little oversteering. Car does benefit a lot from trail braking, just staying on the pedal a little bit longer after you get the nose in, just to keep the front end happy. But other than that, it does not feel all that much different macrocosmically from its 2019 counterpart. However, the details are where the devil lives, and yes, your high-speed grip is greatly diminished. For example, this corner that we just went through, turn 8, that is completely flat, no questions asked, basically in any trim, in any setup in that 2019 car. This one, it's a very big lift, sometimes even a downshift, so it's almost reminiscent of what F1 cars were capable of in the grooved tire era. So that much is the difference in the high-speed cornering grip. It's really, really interesting, especially after years of just having absolute ultra downforce monsters. Now it's going away, and to be honest, it brings you back to basics a little bit. It definitely grabs your attention, and then you're like, oh, I remember how to do this. I'm liking it. Through turn 3, you can see just how much you've got to breathe off of the throttle just to get it stable along the apex before you can really start to accelerate and let it track out again. Again, that was something that just was the way of the world before 2017. Into the big braking zones like this one in turn 9. Very stable. The brakes are very grabby, just as you would expect. Relative loss of downforce doesn't really seem to affect the braking very much. You still have to employ some cadence braking, just like you would in pretty much any open-wheeled car. Because downforce squares with speed in both directions, of course. And of course, once you get the hybrid systems turned on, you'll really start to see where the speed comes in. Breathe out of the throttle, get back into the power. Up half a second already in Sector 1 just because of using the hybrid energy. Cool. Yep, half a lap done, 1 second up. Second gear for turn 9, let it drift a little bit. Back on the power hard, tires are not giving up at all. Lots of grip there under acceleration. The Mickey Mouse chicane here through Sector 3 to end the lap. Horrible what they did to this track, but it's what they do. Really the final corner, flat out, still no problem to take that flat out. Up 1.5 seconds to 1:23.14. For reference, pole position for the 2019 Spanish Grand Prix was a 1:15.3, I think, set by Valtteri Bottas. So We're well off of pole position here, but then again, we're not in qualifying trim yet. We are going to be off of pole position. However, it's, you know, it's not that huge of a difference, all things considered. Whenever we get a new raft of regulations, there's always some contingent of the world that's preaching doom and gloom and the end is near and all things like that. However, yes, it is slower. I'm not going to try and sit here and pretend that it's not slower, but it's not the point. The point is we're trying to make these cars more raceable, and we're trying to make them more interesting to watch for the spectators as well, in terms of these guys having to pedal it a little bit and chase the cars around. And that's definitely something that I'm sure, as you've noticed at this point, I'm having to do that. These things are not just glued to the tarmac. They will get a little bit out of line, and you've got to correct them. Of course, the grip is still extremely good. I'm also not going to pretend that this is something like a Formula 3 car on rain tires. No, this is thoroughly something that you'd expect out of a Formula 1 type design. But I would say it's more in the spirit of something from the mid-2000s than it is something from 2019, 2020. Heavy braking zones with the turn-in. You do, of course, have to be mindful of your weight transfer, just like you normally would be anyway. Just really notice it in the high-speed corners like that one there. Engine power is well more than enough. As I'm sure you can see by now, we got about 990 horsepower with full hybrid deploy. And you really know about it. There we go, session best 122.92, that looks like. We're going to turn off the hybrid systems, go into the pits at the end of this lap. Just see just how poised it wants to be if you are good. And if you are willing to listen to what the car wants to do. But you can see there, even with the hybrid systems turned off, if you do get on the power a little bit too eagerly, the back end will step out, and then you've got to jump in and correct it. Which again is something that we don't see all that much currently. So I would say that is welcome, very welcome, as we get crazy sideways again. Driving into the pits here. Watch the bumps here on the pit entrance. They will catch you out. They'll stall the floor. But there we are, back into the pit lane. Our session best here is a 122.92 something. We'll check that in a moment. And remember, that's just what it can do on default setup. We're not talking about starting to trim this thing out yet. But, you know, it's a very stable platform, first of all. And that's definitely something that you look for when you're trying to figure something out setup-wise. If it's consistent out of the box, then you know that you always have a safe zone to which you can return when you start playing. So this is definitely very stable out of the box on default setup. And you can see here we haven't even really put all that much wear on the tires visually. So very stable. It's very kind to the tires, provided you don't overdrive it. And really, what is our lap time here? Our session best at the moment is, there's the clock, 122.920. So that's what we have right now as our session best, and we'll have to keep this in mind for the next part of what we're going to be endeavoring to achieve. All right, so back into the setup screen with us. Our best time so far, 122.920, and that is on default setup. We had 32.5 liters of fuel remaining at that point. Now, to illustrate that this is actually a ground effect car rather than one that's using its front and rear wings, let's take off about 50% of that top side downforce. So 5 on the rear and now 15 in the front compared to 30 and 10. So normally, in the sorts of cars that we're accustomed to seeing, that we have been accustomed to seeing for really the past 30 years pretty much, if you took out that much wing and then didn't change anything else about the setup, it would become an absolute horror to drive. You would have no grip in the high-speed corners anymore. The thing would just sail off the road into the nearest immovable object. However, that's not going to be the case with this, as we shall demonstrate. We'll have the same tires, so the medium compound tires, and we will put as much fuel back in as we had remaining. So we had 32.5, so we'll round up to 33. 122.920 to beat. Again, just default setup otherwise, but we have, theoretically speaking now, 50% less downforce. Theoretically because, well, it's not entirely true. Get it back out. We'll just get the tires back up to temperature now. We do have a new set. However, fuel load is the same. The only thing that has changed is our wing angles. Get everything up. Tires are getting there. Slowly but surely. By the end of Sector 2, they'll really be ready to go. We do have our clock up on the screen, so maybe you can see that a little bit more clearly. It's DRS. Second gear, turn it in. On the power. Yep, tires definitely feel like they are getting right up to the top. Grip is good. We'll go into balanced high now. There we are. Through the final corner. Yep, that was a little bit on the gravel there, but that's okay. Straight line speed really climbing. Just about 320 clicks there. Turn 1 tires are still not quite where I want them. You can now see the back end starting to step out. This is really where you can start to see the differences in the driving dynamics here. Taking that wing away, the car is now a whole lot freer, of course. But as we shall see, lap times may not quite tell that story. There's 123.50. We did make quite a few mistakes on that last lap. Still gaining time relative now to our last lap. And the delta continues to grow. Lost a little bit of time there through turn 8. Chasing it around in the braking zone. I think we lost all of our advantage there. Maybe able to claw some back, we'll see. Definitely overdriving it a bit. There you go. 123.527, so 20 thousandths off. Bit of rear locking there. No real problem. A little bit more judicious into turn 9. Understeer there coming up the hill. Get it to the apices here. Nice on the power. Back end step it out there as we got back on the power. Very nice. There it is, 123.071, 122.920 to beat. You can see we should not be able to get within 1/10 of a second of a time that we set with 50% more wing unless something a little bit strange were happening here. You try to do that in the 2019 car, it's just not going to happen. But with this, quite obviously, it is very possible. Why? Well, the wings don't matter for nearly as much as you might think. At under tray with the tunnels that we talked about in showroom view. That is what's doing the vast majority of our downforce generation. That is why we're still able to hang out with our best time at this point with 50% less wing on the car. .122.670, we have now exceeded that time, 122.6. That is faster than we had gone before with 50% less wing on the car. That should not be possible at a track like this, which is so very, very dependent on high-speed grip. Yet there it is. Why? Because in actuality, we haven't really lost all that much. As the under tray, provided that everything's intact and that we're not scraping the ground too bad, that is going to be generating most of that control authority at high speed, and there is the result. Dive back into the pits here. 122.670. That is pretty remarkable, considering that the previous best time, not only was it almost 4/10 quicker, or slower rather, but was done with 50% more grip, in theory. That's cool. That's really, really cool. So you can see the effects here of having the under tray doing the vast majority of our aerodynamic bidding. The wings, yes, they're still important, obviously. You saw how much more difficult the car was to drive there, but the performance is still very much accessible. It's still very much there. If you tried to do that in the 2019 car, it would just sail off the road if you tried to take the corners at the same speeds that you were with, again, for argument's sake, 50% more wing dialed in. So again, you can see this is very much ground effect at work, and it's very much the product of these tunnels along the side of the car. There's the inlets for them, and you can see all the way clear through to the rear where they exit. Yes, right there through our big diffuser. Lots and lots and lots of negative pressure being generated down the midline of the car like that, and that is going a very long way to getting the performance. Right, so we have seen now the illustration of the ground effect aerodynamics. The wings don't matter as much as you might expect, but they still do matter, of course. And lastly, what is the ultimate one-lap qualifying pace of this car? Of course, all of that matters tremendously, and we've got to find out in due course. Just for reference here, pole position for the 2019 Spanish Grand Prix, 115.406. We're not going to get anywhere near that, just to allay any of your concerns, but we can get a little bit closer than the lap time, which we have done, 122.670. And for that, we're going to call up a qualifying setup. We're going to put 10 liters of fuel on board, so I'm just planning an outlap, 2 flyers, and then in soft tires on board, and yeah, we'll be in hot lap mode on the MGU delivery. Maximum downforce, a little bit more brake bias toward the front, 55% there. And then everything else is still basically default. I have loosened up the differential a little bit, simply because that's what I prefer. But that's basically the scope of the changes that we'll have at this point. Let's see what it does. Tires, of course, are cold. The softs will come up a little bit more quickly than the mediums we had been on. Bring it down. We don't want to induce any graining or any flat spots for sure. Last bit of heat with our last properly high-speed corner of the lap. There we go. Go into hot lap mode as we head toward the final corner. There we go. So, the full complement of aerodynamic grip from the wings and from the under tray, coupled with hot lap mode on the ERS and the softest available tire compound. What is this going to yield? A little bit of oversteer there through turn 4 is what it yields so far. A little bit of power oversteer out of turn 5. A little bit of a weird weight transfer across the front axle there. But full power and DRS down the back straight. A little bit early on the brakes there. See what it does. Across the line. 122 dead. 122.008. Fastest lap of the session. I think we have a little bit more in it for our last flyer. A little bit of porpoising across the front axle there. Get the back out with the power oversteer, very nice. The line 120 120.986. And now our in lap, because we don't really have enough fuel to make it around again. But there it is. Is it the 2019 pole position? No, it's not. But it is certainly a big improvement to the tune of just under 2 seconds to what you can do on race pace, at least relatively speaking. So really, there is still quite a bit of performance in this thing. It's still going to be well faster than anything else. It's going to be well faster than Formula 2, even as it is now. So all these other fears that some naysayers are already starting to have about, oh, well, it's going to be slower than Formula 2, it's going to be slower than IndyCar. No, it's actually not. And so far from what I've found, this is still about 10 seconds a lap faster than the Dallara IR18. Into the pits with us. And there you have it. The RSS Formula Hybrid X 2021. Just as they did with their 2017 Formula Hybrid car, they have once again taken a complete shot in the dark, taking a look at a real-world set of regulations and coming up with their own interpretation thereof and bringing it to us in the wide world of sim racing well before anybody in reality has ever gotten to turn a wheel in a car quite like it. This one, even more ambitious, in my opinion, than the 2017 car, because that one, that was ready to go by Christmas or so, 2016. This one, well, we have this in mid-February 2020, and no car like this is scheduled to hit the track until about mid-February 2021. So this thing is a year ahead of the curve, which means that all of us now have a very unique opportunity to sample what the world of open-wheel racing could well become, well in advance of when it really becomes it. And again, we're still waiting on really seeing the absolutely finalized 2021 Formula One regulations. And of course, we have absolutely no inkling of what sorts of designs the teams have already come up with. But pretty much, this is what the cars are going to look like in the grand scheme of things. Of course, all of the teams are constructors still in their own right. So yes, there are plenty of areas on this car as well as on the current ones that are homologated in terms of their dimensions and the scope to which they can develop things. But all of the designs from all the teams will still be original and unique, just as we see today and have seen for decades prior to this point. Of course, there are people who already have some detracting statements, some critical statements about not only this particular car and this particular mod in sim racing, but in general, the 2021 regulations proposal and the overall direction that F1 seems to be going. I've seen some people, even on my own channel, commenting things like, well, they're trying to make the cars look like spaceships. They look so cartoonish. They're just trying to get 12-year-olds interested in this. Like, okay, well, fine. You can have that opinion. But, all right, if we want to approach this from a critical standpoint, aesthetically, this is what everybody is reacting to. Everybody's looking at what they see in front of them, and they're not going to question it any further than that, because that's just generally the level of discourse that we're at today. So they look at things like these wheel covers. All right, they look kind of strange. They're little display units, and you saw that in the little intro B-roll there. And you'll see it again on the replay. Yeah, they're display units. Will they be on the actual Formula One cars? Maybe, maybe not. According to the modelers at RaceSim Studio, who have done quite a lot of research behind putting this car together, that's legal in the regulations for 2021. So will we see them? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a possibility. Beyond all of the other things, you see the front wings here. They're very low, very wide, and very simplistic. Well, why do they look like that? Well, why do they look like that now, even in 2020? Outwash. You're trying to control things like that. And that outwash to try and get the airflow around the front tires to cut down on drag, that's one of the contributions to the turbulence that follows these cars. That wake turbulence, that's what unsettles the cars behind, which is why they can't race. So if you want to look at it from an aesthetics standpoint and say, okay, well, these wings look really weird. And even for me personally, I don't really like these end fences here. I think they look a bit strange, these weird triangular shapes that are just sticking up at 90 degrees. It looks odd. It's a little bit unsettling after years and years and years of seeing relatively similar designs up and down the grid. However, if you want to take it at face value, you're going to miss the point. Why have they done this? Well, you're going to limit that outwash. You're basically going to eliminate outwash, which is going to cut down on the turbulence behind the cars, which is, in theory, going to make the cars able to follow more closely through high-speed corners, which, in theory, is going to improve the racing. So if you're somebody who's going to take a look at these things from an aesthetic standpoint, and only from an aesthetic standpoint, and not give any credence to the bigger picture, you've completely missed the point. And I would guarantee that most of the detractors of the 2021 rules are those people who are complaining about the racing. Okay, it looks very processional, because in most cases it is, because the cars simply can't follow each other very closely through high-speed corners most of the time. Why? Because of all the aerodynamic stuff that they've got going on. So these designs here are addressing that. Maybe they look unsettling to you. Maybe they're not what you're accustomed to seeing. If that's going to be a deal breaker for you, then look elsewhere. I don't know what else to tell you. Other things that I personally don't like. These wheel covers, all right? Just trying to be devil's advocate here. An open-wheeled car is exactly what the term says. It's supposed to have completely unshielded, open wheels, meaning that we don't have fenders. These little winglets over the tires here on the front end, well, they're not fenders, but they look an awful lot like fenders, even though they wouldn't be really effective as such. Is this still an open-wheeled car? There's an argument to be made, no, and there's also an argument to be made, yes. Of course, I would even be one to espouse the argument of no, given that Formula E and their Gen 2 car, I would not consider that to be a strictly open-wheeled car, simply by the way the bodywork is. However, when you look deeper into something like this and you start to understand why this has been implemented, well, again, it has to do with the turbulence, all that air coming off of those open wheels, open in the airstream. it generates a lot of drag, it generates a lot of turbulence, which of course is going to impact the car behind, which means that they won't follow closely, which means that they won't race well. You put these little devices over top of the wheels, okay, yeah, it's not 100% an open-wheeled car anymore, if you want to make that argument. But is it going to make the racing better? At least in theory, yes. All right, so you see all of these things that are being implemented, some of these things which are a little bit of a shock to the system. However, what does everybody have in common, whether you're a fan of what Formula One has turned into or you're not? Everybody in common can agree to say they need to do something about overtaking. That's exactly what these rule changes are doing. They are trying to address those concerns. Maybe you can disagree with the precise implementation of the devices that they've come up with to do this. Fine. But if you're going to be somebody who's complaining year on about overtaking, and then you see the regulations addressing those concerns, which all have to do with overtaking, and then immediately you're going to dismiss them, what are you on about? Another thing I can poke some fun at, the rear wing. No end fences on this rear wing. Why? Well, end fences, in addition to making the rear wings more efficient, yes, they also create wingtip vortices, which are drag, which are turbulence, which are hindrances to the cars behind. You remove them, you're going to smooth out that airflow over the rear wing. It makes the rear wing a whole lot less efficient. I mean, this is probably the most inefficient rear wing we've seen since the 1980s. But if it's going to address the problems of cars being able to follow each other, then so be it. Does it create more drag? Yeah, it creates a lot more drag. Does it hurt the straight line speed? Yes, it absolutely does. But in addition to making it easier for cars to follow, if you're also going to continue using DRS, right? If DRS is something that's going to stick around for a while, maybe that's something you want. Maybe you want the rear wing to be a little bit more of a parachute so that when you do open up the flap, it's more effective. Perhaps you would actually see DRS living up to its potential, if that is what they want to do. There is still some talk about whether or not DRS will even be used for 2021, but it is on the table, and at this point it appears that the cars will be DRS capable at very least, if they don't implement it, basically. But it's there. And again, all of these things are designed to try and increase the prospects for overtaking. So with all of the furor that's been around for the last 5 seasons at least, when it's been really, really prevalent about overtaking, for people to be complaining about the proposed regulations simply because they don't like the way that they look, it's a bit myopic, especially when the cars are going to look like this simply because of all of the complaining that's been going on. So take it or leave it. But that's what I think about the issue, and ultimately, I think it's very promising. The cars we've seen here, it's fast. It's still really fast. It's still faster than anything else that's out there, and I think it's going to be befitting the specs of a Formula One car. The performance is there. The high-speed cornering grip is still there. The low and medium-speed stuff, you got to chase it around a little bit more. And all the people who are now of my vintage and even before talking about, well, the good old days in the 90s where they had groove tires and the cars were slithering around all the time and the drivers were always on opposite luck, you get that with this. So I really don't see where anybody loses unless you happen to be somebody who is just a really crazy fan of barge boards, because, sorry, I hate to tell you, barge boards are gone. But aside from that, it looks like that we do have all of the makings of some great things which are soon to come. Therefore, I definitely say that this is a good thing, not only for the real world here, but for sim racing, for Racing Studio to have brought this out when they have, so that we basically have an entire year to get up to speed with all of this and to start to solidify what our expectations should be as we look into the next generation of Formula One design. With that rant concluded, though, all I've got to say is definitely this is a car that deserves a place in your sim racing garage. If you don't have it, go get it. Links to the Racing Studio website are in the description, and from there you can go find the links to their store where you can get this car for the nominal €3.99, but in reality you can basically set your own price, so give them what you feel that they deserve, and in my opinion they deserve a whole lot more than €3.99. However, aside from all of that, go check out the Racing Studio website, and for our purposes here, that's all I've got for you. Of course, hot laps from external as well as onboard replay cameras shall follow to conclude all of this, so please do stay tuned for all of that. Until next time, though, I do. Thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari-bound 601 saying thanks. And of course, we will see you soon.